So I've been reading through the Brothers Karamazov, and it's my first time reading anything by Dostoyevsky, and I definitely started with a doozy. I've read online a lot of people recommend starting with Crime and Punishment or starting with something shorter like White Nights or The Idiot, but I really was intrigued when I heard about the Brothers Karamazov and I heard the premise of the story. I wanted to read it. So I picked this one up, and I've been moving through it fairly slowly, but I'm about halfway through now, and I thought instead of trying to do one giant video talking about all the book, I'll probably talk about half of it now. The half that I've read, I wanted to kind of discuss what I've been reading, and then I'll do another one when I finish it and maybe cover more. But I do want to say, going into it, I've noticed, I think I'll probably need to read through this book a few more times in my life before I feel really that I'm fully grasping everything and really solid on everything. So keep that in mind as I'm discussing. I could get things wrong. I'm also only halfway through, so there could be things I don't know yet. But I just have a lot of thoughts already, and I don't know anyone that's read it, so I want to talk about it. So anyway, to start off with, I'll give the premise. So in the Brothers Karamazov, it's set in Russia, obviously, but it's about four brothers, and one of them is illegitimate, but it's Ivan, Dmitry, Alyosha, and Smerdyakov is the illegitimate brother, and each of them sort of represents a different idea or belief or stance in life, and that's what the author Dostoyevsky was doing in this book. Dostoyevsky, however you say it, was using each of these brothers to sort of represent, and each character to represent a different thought process and philosophy for life. And it's a very, very interesting thing. When you know that going into it, it makes it fascinating, because this whole book is sort of him having these discourses between these characters, and these characters butting heads and debating beliefs and having these different conflicts. And it's fascinating because you know that Dostoyevsky is writing this because he was sort of reasoning through these things himself and struggling through these things. And this book was originally written, it was serialized in the newspaper, I believe, and it came out in sections. And so when you look at the length, that's kind of crazy to me to think about how long people must have been reading this in sections, coming out little by little. But it also makes it make more sense, I think, because when you sit down to read it all in one sitting, it's a lot, and each conversation feels just like a lot back to back. But the original readers would have been reading this sort of more spread out and in chunks, and that makes more sense, I think. So I've been trying to take this book fairly slowly, mostly because I want to make sure I'm grasping everything and sort of sitting on it and chewing on it as I'm going through it. And I found that a lot of times I'll come to the end of a conversation between characters, which conversations can last up to 100 pages, you know? So I'll come to the end of a conversation and I'll think, okay, what was the main point being made in this conversation? I can't recall every extraneous detail. I can't recall every single thing mentioned, but I can sort of break it down to the most basic idea or most basic points. So that's what I've been doing as I've been going through it. And that's why I say I think in the future, you know, I'll reread it a couple times, hopefully in my lifetime, and I'll be able to more fully grasp it each time I read it, because there's just a lot here. But what I've read so far, I've really been enjoying. So the four brothers, as I said, each represent a different sort of idea or philosophy. So you have Ivan, who is the sort of philosopher. He's very intelligent. Thinks through things. Very intelligent. He likes to think through things. He's very argumentative about different subjects. And it's not so much that he doesn't believe in God. From what I've gathered, he says it's not that he doesn't believe in God. It's that he chooses not to believe in a God that would allow suffering to exist in this world. And Ivan argues points like, if there is no God, then all things are permissible for man. And if all things are permissible, nothing is wrong, which is very much the relativist sort of stance we see a lot of people take, and they try to argue that relativism doesn't necessarily mean that there can be no moral standard, but actually, by definition, relativism does mean there can be no moral standard. So Ivan is very much one of those very, very in his head, very thinking through things, very much at odds with the idea of God, and very much a materialist and things like that. And then we have Dmitry, and Dmitry is very much a sensualist, and he's all about physical pleasure and lust and passions, and he doesn't bother to control his emotions and his temper, and he's up and down and kind of all over the place. And one day he's thinking about ending his own life, and the next it's all about some girl that he's in love with, and he's very much up and down and all over the place, much like his father, much like the boy's father in a way, but also different. And then we have Alyosha, who is the spiritualist. He is the Christian. He is a very, very devoted Christian. He is very, very patient and kind and considerate and compassionate. He's tries very hard to connect with all of his brothers and to sort of make the family work and to stop them from doing things he thinks will harm them, or trying to understand why they think certain things. And he's the only brother that their father really, really trusts at all. And so Alyosha is the hero of the story, according to Fyodor Dostoyevsky, which I agree, obviously he's the hero of the story, but he is very much trying to bring together his family and not have things kind of fall apart like they're doing. So the father in this story is Fyodor Pavlovich, I believe is his name, I'm thinking. Well, it's Karamazov, but they have lots of different names. I've noticed in Russian literature, I've been reading a lot of Russian classics, and I've noticed it seems like everybody has 20 different names. So I need to do more research to understand what that's about. But Fyodor is the name of the father, which I think is interesting because the father in this story, Fyodor, is the most terrible character in the story, arguably. He's a really awful man, very greedy, very not good hygiene, very disgusting, very focused on lust and sexual pleasures and drive, and very self-centered, things like that. He has no respect for others. He's very rude. And it's interesting to me that Fyodor Dostoyevsky named that character Fyodor. Like, he named him, he gave him his own name. It's almost to me a very humble statement saying, look, this is the worst character. I am no better than this man. And that's interesting to me because there's a part of the book, a quote that I love, that I wanted to read. A criminal can have no judge upon the earth until that judge himself has perceived that he is every bit as much a criminal as the man who stands before him. And I think the author takes that stance very clearly just by naming the worst character in this story after himself and showing, I don't believe I'm any better than the worst sinner in this story, which I think is something we've lost. It's something that I've admired as I've been reading the book. Sorry, my thoughts are all over the place, but it's something I have admired while I've been reading the book, because I think something I notice in our society today is we have such a lack of empathy and understanding, and we have these complexes where we think, I'm better than this person because they did this horrible thing. Let's cancel them for that. Look how great I am because I would never do that. And that's such a stupid mentality, because we are all imperfect. We all do terrible things. We all make mistakes. And when we're so quick to pick up stones and throw them at people, then we have to work so hard to keep up this facade and pretend that we're not bad. We haven't done bad things. We're not imperfect. And rather, the way we should be living is through compassion and empathy. And I've been reading Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton as well, which kind of almost sort of works with what I've been reading here. But he says that one of the beautiful lessons of Beauty and the Beast is that for the beast to become lovable, he first must be loved. And we're all, deep down inside, we're all beasts because we all have that depravity in our nature. It's part of who we are as humans. It's part of the fallenness of our nature. And it's when we experience love, and true love, love that loves us in the middle of our mess, and even though we are depraved, even love that loves us in spite of that, that is when we become lovable. That is when we're transformed and we're able to begin to change and to not give in to that depravity. And that comes through Jesus Christ. And anyway, all that wrapping back into this, that's sort of, I think, one of the points that Dostoyevsky is making in this book, because we see a lot of what he is struggling with and what the characters are struggling with is an overarching theme almost of, if God is good, why does he allow suffering in this world? And that's a question we face all the time from so many people. And it's those sorts of questions. And Dostoyevsky draws parallels from Job and other places in the Bible, and he's showing, this question. And you have different perspectives. You have Ivan, who says, because Ivan himself says, I believe God exists, but because he allows suffering and evil, by allowing us to have free will, then I want nothing to do with him. Whereas you see somebody like Father Zosima, who's a character who is he's a priest or something in the church, and Alyosha really looks up to this man, and Father Zosima says, in contrast to what Ivan says, Father Zosima points out that Job is an incredible story in the Bible, because you look at what a beautiful mystery it is that Job could lose everything and yet turn around and praise God and then have it all restored back. And Father Zosima talks about the suffering he's seen and experienced in his own life, the suffering his brother has seen, because his brother was very sick and died very young, and yet his brother praised God and was so in love with life and with the Creator and those things. And so you see these contrasts throughout the book that are so stark, and it's so interesting to read, and it really, as I've been reading it, it really makes me wrestle with those things, because I've heard these same arguments often. I love watching For instance, there's Cliff Connectley you can find him on YouTube, wherever. He goes to college campuses and he just takes questions and has conversations with college students. And it's fascinating because I've watched so many of those videos. I love them. But all the questions that Dostoyevsky attacks in this book, the points Ivan makes and attacks with, are all the same questions that people are still asking now, that I see these college students asking on these campuses. And it's fascinating because we move round and round in these questions, asking the same questions over and over. And yet it seems as though no amount of words and no amount of arguments ever gets through to anyone or ever changes anyone's opinions. It seems like if you're on one side and you believe in God, then that's just what you do. And then if you're on the other side and you don't believe in God and you're trying to somehow disprove him or prove to yourself that he's not worth believing in, then no amount of words help that either. But that's what I loved about the way Dostoyevsky approached this same problem. Because Ivan is talking about this problem and he shares this story that he himself wrote, that Ivan wrote, called The Grand Inquisitor. And in The Grand Inquisitor, it's basically a story. So it's a story within a story. So we're reading Ivan's conversation to Alyosha. And Ivan says, I wrote this story, here it is. And in this story, it's set in Spain during the time of the Inquisition. And Jesus comes back. And it's not like his second coming. It's supposed to be just, he comes back to help people because he loves us and he just wants to make sure we're okay. And so Jesus is walking through the crowds and he's healing people and, healing people's wounds and sicknesses and everything. And the Grand Inquisitor comes out. And the Grand Inquisitor he's in the church, in the Catholic Church. I don't know the exact authority level, but basically he's in charge, he's high up there. And he walks out and he sees Jesus and he commands Jesus to be arrested. And so Jesus is taken and arrested and taken into a prison cell. And the Grand Inquisitor goes to confront Jesus. And it's a long story. I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but it's very much worth reading if you can find it online or get the book or whatever. But in the Grand Inquisitor chapter, basically the Grand Inquisitor confronts Jesus and says, by giving free will to humanity, you've doomed humanity to fail. And he says, you give them the option to follow you, to be saved, but you know that by giving them free will, most of them won't be able to overcome their sin nature and will just die and go to hell and they'll live miserably anyway. And so the Grand Inquisitor says, actually, you're hurting people, you're not helping them. And so we as the church have decided no longer to follow you. We say we follow you, but we're actually following the devil because he offered you. So this is where the Grand Inquisitor starts talking about the 3 temptations Jesus was faced with in the wilderness from the devil. And the Grand Inquisitor says the devil offered you food, he offered you all the kingdoms of the world and the authority, and he offered you protection, all these. He goes through the 3 things that the devil tempted him with. And he says, we took those things from him because you would not take care of us in that way. You're not taking care of the people. So now we have all the authority in the kingdoms of the earth. We have the power. The people follow us. And even if they burn in hell when they die, at least while they're on earth, they'll be happy and we'll allow them to sin and tell them that we'll take on the blame for their sin because we know they're too weak-willed to be able to not sin and follow you. And you read this, it's sort of a bombshell. It's like, oh my gosh, like I cannot believe. That's insane. And as you're reading it, Ivan is telling the story and you're just thinking, wow, like this is, it sort of takes you aback, you're taken aback. But what blew me away, what I absolutely loved, is Jesus's response in this story. And so before I say that, I want to say when Dostoyevsky was writing this, he was actually really nervous because, like I said, it came out in serializations, and he was afraid that Ivan's arguments would be too convincing and that Dostoyevsky, who is very religious, would actually have the opposite effect he wanted and actually turn people away from God. And so he was concerned about how he was going to have Jesus respond to make sure it actually had the impact it needed and gave the answer it needed, when in reality the question of suffering and all these things are a very difficult question to have a verbal, concise answer to. And so I absolutely love how Dostoyevsky wrote Jesus' response. And Jesus' response in this story is he didn't, go off on the priest or on the Inquisitor. He didn't go start yelling at him or telling him all the ways he was wrong or all those things. What Jesus did was he kissed him. And it's this one action just of compassion and love and empathy. And it's, and let me just say, I know it might sound weird that he kissed him, but it's in their culture that was very different. It was a sign of respect and of greeting and those things. So not that's out of the way. So he does this, and the Grand Inquisitor is so shaken up by Jesus's simple action of love and empathy and compassion that he just lets Jesus go. Whereas before he was saying, I'm going to kill you in the morning, I'm going to have you hanged from the gallows in front of everyone. He just lets Jesus go. And that's what's so profound to me, and what stuck out to me most so far in this book is that for all the arguing, for all the circles that are being run intellectually, for all the points that Ivan and that others are making, and the same goes today, all the points people make, all the things they say about why they don't believe God, why they think he's wrong, why they think he's bad, why they think he's not doing right by us. It wasn't an argument, it wasn't actions, it wasn't words that convinced the Grand Inquisitor or that changed the Grand Inquisitor's heart. It was one action of love from Jesus. And I think in our culture, that is the greatest possible thing we can do to share Jesus with others and to share that love and to answer those questions, is to love others, to sit in suffering with others, to be with those who are sick and hurting, to be with those who are suffering, to just be there, to do what we can, to bring them food, to help them, to sit with them, to talk with them, whatever people need. Actions speak so much louder than words. And I think we can have these arguments and we can go in circles and say, well, I don't believe in God because of this, this, and this. And I can sit and argue with you all day about why I can disprove moral relativism or things like that. But it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, what matters is when I actually show you love and compassion, and when I am actively being the hands and feet of Jesus, that is the only thing that brings about change. And so that's what's stood out to me most so far in this book, and what really struck me in that chapter, which I know is the most well-known chapter from this book, is the Grand Inquisitor chapter. And it's interesting because a lot of the points that Dostoyevsky is making about suffering are very difficult to swallow, because the way he presents them are very, very graphic and painful to read. And it makes you stop and think, because as a Christian, I've heard those kinds of questions all the time, but I don't often have such visceral examples that force me to really take a step back and say, oh my gosh, like we live in a world filled with suffering and evil and suffering of innocents that don't deserve it. But the only answer I have, the only answer any of us has truly is Jesus, and faith in Jesus, and faith in the one that came and suffered for us and then rose again after that suffering, so that we would have someone with us who has been through suffering, Jesus Christ himself, and faith in the one who suffered for us, because Jesus came and suffered unimaginable suffering so that we would not be alone in our suffering. So regardless of whether we have to go through suffering or whether we live relatively easy lives, it doesn't mean God is any less good. And I love that argument in this book, and that sort of thing being worked through in this book so much. And it makes me excited to see where it's going to go, because I know that further along down the line in the book, and this is on the back of the book, so it's not a spoiler, but about halfway through the book, Fyodor, the father, gets murdered, and then it turns into a murder mystery. Whereas for the first half, I'm about 500 pages in, it's just been sort of setting the scene of all the characters and all their different ideologies and different things. And so I've really been enjoying it. Like I said, I've been having to move very slowly, but I've really been enjoying it, and it's been making me think a lot. And I love it. I love Dostoyevsky's writing. It's so different from someone like Tolstoy. I love Tolstoy's writing. I find it very easy to connect with. He's very good at writing emotions and the thoughts of characters and the inner workings of a character, whereas Dostoyevsky is very much, he writes in dialogue, is how I would describe it, where the majority of the book is dialogue. You have some actions, you have characters moving from place to place, things like that, but the majority of things play out in dialogue, at least in this book. And so it's been really, and I think it makes sense when you think about how he published this book, how it was serialized. But anyway, it's been interesting to compare the two, because the Russian classics I've read so far, I've read Anna Karenina by Tolstoy, and I've read Eugene Onegin by Alexander Pushkin, which obviously Eugene Onegin is written in verse. So that was very different too, very fun book. So I'm really enjoying this, and it's just giving me so much food for thought, and I'm really excited to read the last half and sort of revisit this and see how my thoughts might change, or my perspectives might change based on further along in the book, So anyway, I hope this discussion was enjoyable in some way, and I hope that it will encourage you to read this book, because I definitely think, even though it's big, it's kind of intimidating, it's definitely worth it. It just take your time with it. Don't feel like you need to rush through it. So anyway, I'll see you next time, and I can't wait to come back and finish this book and do the second part of this. So hope you have a good day.